What we're looking for is ships from 41 to 43 north and from 49 to 51 west, all in April 1912.
Okay.
Some of these logs have not been opened for nearly a century.
So this is
The first, from the SS Bremen,
but in the same position.
set off from New York towards Europe just 4 days after the disaster.
But in the same position.
4:30, they are passing drifting wreck pieces.
Wow, wreckage, yeah.
Und viele Leichen. And this is the reason because these crosses are written down here.
What does unfeeler lichen mean?
Viele Leichen is a lot of dead bodies.
Wow. So they're actually passing Titanic's wreck site.
Must be.
A passenger, Mrs. Johanna Stunker, later described the scene from the Bremen.
Looking down over the rail, we distinctly saw a number of bodies so clearly that we could make out what they were wearing and whether they were men or women. We saw one woman in her nightdress with a baby clasped to her breast. Bodies of 3 men in a group, all clinging to one steamship chair floated nearby, clinging together as though in a last desperate struggle for life.
But within and around the tragic evidence of the disaster, Tim begins to uncover the scientific records of the water and air temperatures that he's looking for.
And I'm wondering if you've got things like the Paula and the Trautenfels and the Deutschland.
Here we are. It's a little bit difficult because it's in old German handwriting and I'm not so easily used to it, but I can try to.
Acting as weather ships, every 4 hours the crews are sent to measure the water and air temperatures as they travel along the steamer tracks.
Let's say big icebergs on this position.
Okay, and which position is this one?
The new position is on 41.58 north.
That's Titanic's latitude.
36.
That's
west.
Titanic's longitude, so she's at Titanic's wreck site. That's incredible. I believe that the Paula is the last ship that we have records from that went through where Titanic sank. What do these remarks here in the water temperature show us?
Yes, the temperature is going down from 12.8 to 2.2, 1.1.
1.1? Wow.
Yeah.
And what's amazing here is that it's going from 12 degrees in the evening the day before, right the way down to minus 1.4. So it's actually gone to below freezing, and then it's jumped straight back up again to 13 degrees.
As the ships cross the Atlantic, they record huge, sudden changes in temperature. It gives Tim the kind of detail that can uncover a picture of the progress of Titanic that has been hidden for a century.
Next hour, 0.5.
Could you give me these temperature readings, and I'll put them into the computer. Yeah.
This is 14.2.
14.2, okay.
Slowly, the map of the Labrador Current is coming into focus. Like a forensic detective, he has uncovered the progress of the Labrador Current as it flowed across the path of the shipping lanes near Titanic's wreck site.
The more that I looked into the detail of the temperatures at Titanic wreck site and the better resolution I got by the clearer and clearer data, what I could see was that not only did Titanic sink really, really close to the barrier between the warm water and the cold water, but that boundary was very clearly defined.
And adding Titanic to that century-old map shows him something new. After the Labrador Current had crossed the steamer tracks, Titanic sailed directly into the fresh, freezing water. Tim's search for the facts behind the tragedy is beginning to bear fruit. He's convinced that the timing of Titanic's arrival in the current and the bizarre set of events that surround the tragedy are more than just coincidence. And he's not the only one who thinks that science can provide an answer. There were those amongst the survivors who felt what happened had to be more than bad luck. It's in the writing of one of his key witnesses, second-class passenger and science teacher Lawrence Beasley.
And Beasley leaves us with this tantalizing line. He says, "I know there must be some missing evidence, but I don't know what it is, and we'll have to wait until it arrives."
His search takes him to the archives of the Meteorological Office in southwest England. He has found evidence of one final set of logs, one more ship that took measurements very close to the site where Titanic sank.
This is the log of the Marengo. She left New York on the 11th of April 1912. 40:56. This is very, very near Titanic's wreck site, the day Titanic collided. The sea temperature is dropping dramatically. And let's see what it says in the remarks section. Gosh, this is amazing. Here, at 8 o'clock, it says much refraction. And then at noon, much refraction on horizon. And then great refraction at 4 p.m. And at midnight, she says much refraction, stars very clear and bright. And that's what the survivors noticed, is how clear and bright the stars were.
The sea was so very still, and the sky, so many stars. Never saw so many in my whole life.
Each star seemed, in the keen atmosphere, to have increased its brilliance tenfold, and to twinkle and sparkle with a staccato flash that made the sky seem nothing but a setting made for them in which to display their wonder.
When the sailors write of refraction, what they're describing is strange optical effects and distortions in the clear air. The surviving passengers described it as bright, twinkling stars.
The amazing thing is that there are very, very few ships that were in the right place at the right time. And in fact, this is the only log in the whole of the Met Office that is in the right place at the right time. And yet, what's incredible is in the remarks section, it's just full of refraction.
By forensically examining logs and confirming what he finds with eyewitness testimony, Tim is the first person to have located these optical effects at the site of the disaster. Now that he's on the trail, Tim uncovers in documents not seen for 100 years that other ships passing through the wreck site also noticed other strange visual phenomena.
The Trautenfels. Yes, this is the word Luftspiegelung.
And what does that mean? What does Luftspiegelung mean?
Luft is air,
Yeah,
and Spiegel is mirror.
yeah.
And altogether, it's air mirror.
Like a
I think
mirage?
Yes.
That's
yes.
absolutely
I think
incredible.
This is what they meant.
At last, Tim has found something that might explain what happened that night.
Clear horizon with mirage in the afternoon. Clear horizon with mirage.
To find out more about refraction and mirages and their magical effects, there is one obvious place for Tim to go.
desert, because when you think of Mirage, you think of the desert. You think of thirsty people trekking thousands of miles across the desert, trying to fill up their water bottles. And they can see a shimmering, what looks like a shimmering lake of water in the distance, and they walk and walk and walk, but they never get there. And that's the classic Mirage. So I figured that if we come out here to the classic Mirage territory, it should be a pretty good place to learn all about Mirages.
Tim has come to meet a man who specializes in capturing extraordinary visual phenomena. Photographer Ed Darroch is a mirage chaser.
The way it'll start, like it did today, is I'll be driving down a road. I'll notice that the conditions are right for a mirage because I'll see them on the road. You'll see the typical sort of water mirage where it looks like there's water. Once you get up to it, it's not.
And what causes, you know, that sort of shimmering effect? What causes that?
It's just differences in air density. Most people, when they look through the sky through clear air, they just think, oh, it's clear air, there's nothing there. It's not the case. It's a lens. And how much it will distort or affect what the viewer sees of an object can vary depending on atmospheric conditions.
Talk is not enough to grasp fully the power of a mirage. Just now, the ground is much warmer than the air above it. This difference in temperature is what bends the light from the blue sky towards the ground, giving a shimmering effect on the sand. As the helicopter passes through the layers of air, it demonstrates another effect. The air is acting something like a lens, bending and shaping what we see. The result is all sorts of strange distortions, haziness, and reflection.
This is a sequence, this is one of my favorite sequences with mirages. You can see it in the distance. You don't know what that is. It looks like a spaceship coming at you. Yeah. It's a black blob, and this is on a highway in New Mexico. Yeah. And you have no idea what it is, and slowly it emerges. It still looks like a spaceship right there.
Yeah. It's floating in the air.
It's floating in the air. It seems to be floating in the air. But then when you get up here, you see it. It's a car with two trucks behind it.
Oh. Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing, isn't it? That just shows that your eyes can deceive you so much with this sort of stuff.
Well, it's not your eyes that are deceiving you. Your eyes aren't deceiving anything. What it is the lens of the air between the object and what you're seeing. That's the deception.
So it's a real image?
It is a real image. Of course it's a real image. I mean, the camera doesn't lie. This is a very, very vivid example of atmospheric refraction at work and how it cloaks reality.
How is it similar, this hot desert, to the cold environment of the Titanic?
The similarities are that there are layers of air that are very different in air density because of the temperature differences.
Now that makes a lot of sense because, for example, when they were collecting the bodies from the Titanic, they actually noted that the air changed from 56 to 32 in half a mile.
That's a tremendous difference in air temperature. So you had very different masses of air right next to one another, one on top of the other. And so that would really dramatically bend the light rays.
Albert. How can something travel tonight? Rebellion will get you nowhere. Monogamy is not natural.
Be quiet. How could you be so careless with my heart?
The past, present, future is but an illusion.
Genius. Vanaf zondag 23 april. National Geographic.
Wij kopen auto's aan iedereen aanbevolen.
Ik ben zeer tevreden over de service.
Ik had niet verwacht dat het zo makkelijk ging.
Wij kopen auto's. Gemakkelijk gratis online taxeren. Maak een afspraak bij een vestiging bij jou in de buurt. En verkoop snel en veilig. Ga nu naar wijkopenauto's.nl.
Ik had er een heel goed gevoel bij.
Wat zullen we dit weekend gaan doen?
Met een boot door een olifantenvallei. En dan met apen in touwbruggen klimmen. Of op expeditie over de ijzige Noordpool. En op safari.
Je vindt het allemaal in Wildlands Adventure Zoo Emmen. Dit is mijn passie. Daar geniet ik echt van. En dit is de nieuwe Danio Bananasplit. Daar geniet ik ook vol van. Romige kwark met de volle smaak van banaan en knapperige chocola. Danio. Taste life to the full.
Oh damn, so glam. Yes ma'am, grand slam. Pure power, rush hour. Damn. I need a cold shower. Cracking codes, stitching roads, heart screams, mind explodes. There we go, stole the show. Say my name. Stelvio.
Alfa Romeo Stelvio. Nu in de showroom.
Nu bij Hollands Nieuwe. De Huawei P10 Lite met 1000 MB minuten of sms voor maar €20 per maand. Kijk snel op hollandsnieuwe.nl.
Hey man, what are you into? Sports? Having fun? Travel? Notice I didn't say shopping. Luckily, there's the Man Box. Your style choices in a box to you. Zalando. Men's style decision too.
En verander zo vaak als je wilt van gedachten. Dankzij gratis levering en retour.
Geen toestel nodig? Kies dan voor SIM-only van Hollands Nieuwe. Met 1000 MB minuten of sms voor slechts €8 per maand. Kijk snel op hollandsnieuwe.nl.
Dominic Toretto just went rogue. I'm taking you down. Toretto. You wanna play like that?
Fire!
Oh, damn!
Fast and Furious 8. Nu in de bioscoop. Ook in IMAX.
Groei door. Kies voor een van de ruim 1000 opleidingen van de LOE. Dan word je altijd begeleid door topdocenten met ruime ervaring in jouw vakgebied. Klassikaal, maar ook thuis staan de docenten altijd voor je klaar. Zo sta je er nooit alleen voor. Kijk op loi.nl.
Hou je van Fast and Furious 8? Dan ga je naar View. Koop nu je kaarten op viewcinemas.nl.
Verstop je niet meer achter je masker. Reinig je poriën en onthul je mooie gezicht. Met de kracht van zuiveringssoda en houtskool. Bioré.
Albert. How can something travel through that? Rebellion will get you nowhere. Monogamy is not natural.
Be quiet. How could you be so careless with my heart?
Present, future is but an illusion.
Genius. Vanaf zondag 23 april. National Geographic.
All the pieces are beginning to click into place. Tim has seen how the lens of hot and cold air can bend light. And Ed has confirmed for him the importance of the data he has gathered from the witness testimonies and ancient records. Clearly, Titanic was sailing into very specific and unique conditions. Ahead of her, the warm water of the Gulf Stream had warmed the air above. The Labrador Current had recently brought freezing water underneath the warm air. The air close to the sea began to cool, cold air below, with warmer air higher up. And as the perfect conditions for miraging came together, Titanic arrived.
Eyes ahead! Eyes ahead! Eyes ahead!
With all his evidence, Tim finally has a theory proving that strange optical effects and distortions can occur on a night that looks perfectly normal. In fact, it was far from normal.
One of the things which fascinates people the most about the Titanic is that deep down, people still don't really understand why it happened. Lawrence Beasley says that, having looked at everything himself, that there's got to be something missing, and he better reserve judgment until that evidence is forthcoming. And I know that this is that evidence.
There is a lot for it to explain. As Titanic was sinking, several of the passengers and crew on board claimed to have seen a nearby ship.
I showed them a bright white light that I took to be a ship about 5 miles off, and which I felt sure was coming to our rescue.
Everyone who saw this mystery ship thought it had to be close enough to come to their help. But why were they ignored? The nearby ship could only have been the Californian, but the captain, when he was brought before the inquiry just weeks after the disaster, continued to insist that the ship within sight wasn't the Titanic.
You had seen this ship for quite a long time?
That's right, yes.
And in your opinion, what sort of ship was she?
She was something like ourselves, a moderately large passenger steamer. But nothing like the Titanic, or any large White Star or Cunard liner. She might have had some passengers aboard, but she wasn't steaming like a big ship.
And you couldn't, or could you, have been mistaken about the largest ship in the world?
I'm positive that it wasn't the largest ship in the world, or any large passenger steamer at all. I said, to me, it doesn't look like the Titanic. There's no doubt about it. It was a most deceiving night. That's all I can say about that.
Lord eventually handed over the watch, confident in his judgment. For the remainder of the night, he slept. In the morning, he was told the news that the Californian had been looking on as the Titanic sank.
The tragedy with Captain Lord is that he was one of the youngest captains on the North Atlantic because he was one of the ablest. However, that night, he was very much in the wrong place at the wrong time, being right next to Titanic and in fact watching Titanic sink all night. But because of the atmospheric conditions, he wasn't aware of what he was watching.
Lord always maintained his innocence. But what was he looking at exactly? It is, of course, impossible to ask him. But today there are people who Tim can go to as witnesses. The sailors of Newfoundland who spend every day of their lives amongst the icebergs of the Labrador Current.
Do you sail these waters quite a bit?
The most pronounced I've seen is a cruise ship leaving this port at one time. And this cruise ship, which I found out later, was leaving this port, which I normally wouldn't see. But it showed up huge from where I was seeing. And then within 10 to 15 seconds, it just sank and sank and almost disappeared completely. And all I could see was the top of the superstructure. And it was so alarmed, the two of us on board the boat, on board my boat, that I called the cruise ship and asked if they were fine, if they were okay, if the ship was sinking. They said, no, we're fine. So that was a little bit embarrassing to call the cruise ship and find out that it was just an optical illusion that I was looking at.
Have you ever seen things looking nearer than they really are?
Tim has finally shown a decisive link between cold water mirages, commonly seen in the right conditions, and the evidence from the night of the tragedy. Armed with his new research, the more Tim looks, the more evidence emerges that before now has been ignored.
It's really hard for us to understand how Captain Lord could mistake the biggest ship in the world for a cargo ship. But look at this. Look at this. This looks exactly like a cargo ship, and yet this looks like an oil tanker. But in fact, what we realize in this photograph is it's a mirage which is causing an oil tanker to look exactly like a cargo ship.
It is a rarely recorded phenomenon, but it has been captured in this film. Amazingly, this is one and the same ship. A single ship is distorted by a cold water mirage. These images were taken off the coast of Finland, looking out into the sea. first time in a century, it seems perfectly clear that Captain Lord could easily have mistaken Titanic for another, very different vessel. In 1962, aged 84, Captain Stanley Lord died, still having failed to clear his name.
It does actually make me feel sorry for Captain Lord, knowing now what I know about the science of that night. When he is apparently making excuses saying the ship he was looking at didn't look anything like the Titanic, what I now understand is that he was telling the exact truth. And in fact, what he was looking at didn't look anything like the Titanic at all.
Tim's mirage theory can answer the first question of why the Californian didn't come to the rescue of Titanic, but it can do even more. It leads to an explanation of the true great mystery of that night. Why Titanic hit the iceberg at all. The common misconception is that Titanic was going too fast, but Tim's research has already shown that that wasn't necessarily the case.
The experience of dozens and dozens of captains is that it is safe to travel at full speed in ice in clear weather. And this is what Captain Smith and the Titanic was doing. So therefore, something caught them out. They were used to keeping a good lookout. They knew about the conditions. So why, in completely clear weather, what was it that caught them out that caused them to crash into this iceberg?
At the speed they were traveling, in the clear conditions of that night, lookouts Lee and Fleet should have been able to spot an iceberg on the horizon. Plenty of time to raise a warning. But on that night, by the time they sighted, it is virtually right on top of them. For up to 20 minutes, the iceberg was invisible. Tim returns to Newfoundland to see if cold water mirages can affect how icebergs appear.
Have you ever seen any weird effects of light when you've been around the Labrador Current?
Well, we noticed the iceberg certainly will change appearance. Usually in July month, when the sea conditions are quite cold, we'll get a mirage effect. We get a shifting in the overall look of the ice. Sometimes it can appear to be very small, and sometimes it can be monstrous looking type of iceberg. You know, a lot of our guests on board, they think it's a 300-foot high iceberg coming this way, and of course we explain to them that it's probably a mirage effect. And within the hour in the tour, sure enough, you'll see it's almost like a flat piece of ice because it had shifted that much, and they can't believe how it had changed. You know, you'll get a very dramatic effect of the icebergs just shifting, just rising and falling.
Can you imagine how impossible it would be looking out for ice on a miraging dark night?
Can't imagine at all.
A flat piece of ice can look 300 feet tall just by the power of a mirage. And what's more, the sailors only ever catch sight of these disappearing icebergs under very specific conditions.
But it's interesting too, I think what we find too when the sea is calm, it's hard to know where the sea ends and the sky ends. Really, it all seems to blend in, so I can imagine a calm night.
Do you know what you've just said there? That's exactly what Captain Lord said. He said that that night it was impossible to tell where the sky ended and where the sea began.
Once more, Tim has found a way to connect the experience of these sailors with a comment that has lain unnoticed for a century.
It was a very strange night. It was hard to define where the sky ended and the sea commenced. There was what you call a soft horizon.
And not only Lord. The Titanic lookout, Frederick Fleet, was brought before the inquiry and also describes a similar strange phenomenon.
When the haze came, it did not stretch across the horizon. It was right in front, 2 points on each bow. I told my mate Lee there was a slight haze coming. When I noticed the haze, it was nothing in sight.
Naturally, a lot of people blamed him for being asleep or whatever. Nothing could be further from the truth. He was straining his eyes to see ahead. And when the commissioner was grilling him at the British Titanic inquiry, he said there was a slight haze on the horizon. So the commissioner said, well, you should have slowed down then if there was a haze. You should have reported it. And he said, well, it didn't really affect our view ahead. And the commissioner goes, well, how can it be a haze if it didn't affect your view ahead?
The lookouts couldn't understand why they hadn't seen the iceberg earlier. But what they are describing was evidence that Titanic was heading directly towards a cold water mirage.
Have a look at these. These were taken in Finland. But what they show is a horizon that's just been elevated way above where it should normally be. And there's a lot of examples of these. This is a distant sea which has been raised up to create a really quite extraordinary effect. And you can imagine how confusing that would be at night to a sailor who didn't know that that was what was going on.
It's more evidence of the bizarre effects of a cold water mirage at work. Here it is, lifting up a flat horizon. In the daytime, it's easy to see the effect. The island and trees are lifted up, smeared and distorted. On a moonlit night, it can be harder to make things out. On this horizon, the mirage lifts up a band of water. This could well be the mysterious haze on the horizon reported by Frederick Fleet. And within it lies the answer to the other great mystery of Titanic. When Titanic was sailing, there was no moon. The only way the lookouts could spot the iceberg was against the backdrop of a blanket of stars. But if the lens of hot and cold air causes a mirage, it distorts the sea and raises up the horizon behind the iceberg. It's now cloaked. The background of stars disappears. The iceberg becomes completely invisible. The best crew of its day in the best ship.
Eyes ahead! Eyes ahead! Eyes ahead!
But against nature, acting in this way, it had no chance. It's a compelling theory, but Tim's witnesses have given him one last striking proof that the fatal layers of cold and warm air were at the site even as Titanic was sinking.
A couple of survivors give very interesting testimony about smoke that night seeming to hang in a flat, level plane. The first person who does this is Colonel Archibald Gracie, and he notices it just above the wreck site.
What impressed me at the time my eyes beheld the horrible scene was a thin, light gray, smoky vapor that hung like a pall just a few feet above the surface of the broad expanse of sea that was covered with a mass of tangled wreckage. That it was a tangible vapor, not a product of imagination, I feel assured.
But then, from much further away, first-class passenger Philip Mock in his lifeboat, he describes that as Titanic sank, a column of black smoke rose high into the air and then flattened out at the top like a mushroom.
What Philip Mock describes from his lifeboat is how the rising smoke from the doomed ship is stopped when it reaches the much warmer air higher up. Proof that miraging conditions existed at Titanic's wreck site. And in the Exeter archive, Tim discovers that the horrific threat looming over Titanic was made much worse by another hidden force of nature.
This chart of the North Atlantic from April 1912 reveals the Titanic actually sank right in the center of a 1,035 millibar Arctic high. And to put that in context, that is the highest pressure anywhere in the Northern Hemisphere. So it's almost as though this menacing Arctic high, which built up over the North Pole, has swung down and zeroed in on Titanic's crash site.
This pressure cooker over Titanic made everything that happened that night far worse. The witnesses saw the evidence around them in the flat, calm seas and the flickering stars. But until now, no one has ever understood what their evidence has meant.
It's almost as though Titanic sank in a killing zone of nature, where all these very dangerous elements combined to make it fatal.
These extraordinary conditions can explain the two main mysteries that Tim has set out to solve. Why the lookouts failed to see the iceberg, and why the nearby ship failed to come to her rescue. No longer is the Titanic a victim of incompetent humans. If there is a real villain, it's Mother Nature herself. And in one final twist, she denied the victims of one last chance of rescue.
Je hebt drukke kliniekdagen, alle hens aan dekdagen, verband, hecht en geboortedagen.
There you go. Yeah.
Geen dag is hetzelfde. Daarom houdt deze dierenarts zo ontzettend van zijn werk.
I've been doing this for 47 years. Thank you. Let's go.
The Incredible Dr. Paul. Een nieuw seizoen. Vrijdag, 10 uur. National Geographic.
Geurverspreiders moeten je huis fris maken. Niet nat. Daarom heeft Airwick Pure ontwikkeld. De enige spray zonder water, dus ook zonder vochtige nevel. Zodat je volop kunt genieten van het heerlijke parfum. Airwick Pure, een en al parfum zonder vochtige nevel. Pure is nu ook verkrijgbaar als Airwick Freshmatic voor automatische verspreiding.
Unlimited data, bellen, alles. Bij T-Mobile voor €35 per maand.
Ons instinct zegt ons om verder te kijken. Sommige obstakels lijken onoverkomelijk. Maar door ze te overwinnen zul je ontdekken dat geen uitdaging te groot is. De nieuwe Honda Civic.
Start je groep met T-Mobile samen en krijg allemaal tot €5 per maand extra korting. Dan heb je unlimited data, bellen, alles. Niet voor 35, maar vanaf €30 per maand. Samen is slimmer.
Je eerste huis kopen is best spannend. Want je moet het opnemen tegen ervaren professionals. Met de experts en diensten van Vereniging Eigen Huis sta je niet alleen. Bijvoorbeeld met onze bouwkundige keuring. Daarmee voorkom je verrassingen en sta je sterker in de onderhandeling. Een huis kopen begint op eigenhuis.nl. Vereniging Eigen Huis. Sta sterker.
Why limit je scherm? De Samsung Galaxy S8 met Infinity Display, unlimited bellen en 5 gig data. Vanaf €49,50 per maand. Pre-order nu.
Every cookie here at Left Twix is extra crisp, so it stays crunchy when we apply caramel and chocolate.
We went on a tour, right, Twix? And they have the exact same thing.
And up ahead, we have the Left Twix.
Right Twix has the same thing.
They have packing tape like that over at Right Twix?
Try both. Pick a side. Twix.
Something is wrong with the people out here.
They treat us like family.
Get Out, 20 april in de bioscoop.
Bij de meeste pensioenaanbieders betaal je een percentage over jouw vermogen.
Bij Bright vragen we een vast bedrag dat losstaat van je vermogen. Een lidmaatschap. Dus naarmate je pensioen groeit, hou je meer over. Veel meer. Kies voor meer pensioen. Ga naar brightpensioen.nl. De toekomst is bright.
Wij zijn Charlie Temple.
€25 voor een bril.
Inclusief glazen op sterkte. Voor op het werk.
In het weekend.
En in de zon.
Vandaag besteld.
Morgen in huis. In 30 dagen niet goed.
Geld teruggeranst.
Ontdek jouw bril op charlietemple.nl.
Begin vandaag en krijg over je eerste €3000 het lidmaatschap cadeau.
€25 voor een bril, inclusief glazen
op sterkte.
En multifocaal vanaf €29,99. Bestel jouw bril op charlietemple.nl.
Dit is een Bamigo. Een opmerkelijke soort. Hij is sterk en zijdezacht. Bestel je Bamboe Basics op bamigo.com.
Verstop je niet meer achter je masker. Reinig je poriën en onthul je mooie gezicht. Met de kracht van zuiveringssoda en houtskool. Bioré.
Nu gratis scheren bij Bamigo. Ontvang nu bij je bestelling tot een jaar lang gratis scheermesjes. Bestel op bamigo.com.
Mannen, dit is hem. De 3-in-1 crème voor gezicht, lichaam en handen. Nivea Man Crème trekt snel in en plakt niet. Verzorg je goed, voel je goed. Nivea Man Crème. Nivea Man. It starts with you.
It's midnight. Titanic is sinking and calling out for help. Only 10 miles away on the Californian, the radio operator, Cyril Evans, is asleep. But Titanic wasn't being completely ignored. Apprentice James Gibson was on duty.
It being my watch on deck at 12, I went onto the bridge about 15 minutes after 12 and saw that the ship had stopped and that she was surrounded by light field ice. While the second officer and I were having a coffee, after a few minutes I asked him if there was any ships around us. He said there was one on the starboard beam, so looking over I could see like this white light flickering, which I took to be Morse calling us up. I went over and gave one long flash of light back in answer, but the light continued to flicker. So then I gave her the calling up sign.
On Titanic, there seemed to be some hope. Fourth Officer Joseph Boxhall is at the Morse lamp. His target is the mysterious lights of a nearby ship.
Captain Smith was standing by my side, and we both came to the conclusion that she was close enough to be signalled by the Morse lamp. So I signalled to her. I called her up and got no answer. The captain said, "Tell them to come at once. We are sinking." So I sent a signal out to come at once. We are sinking.
At the very moment that Boxall had his binoculars up, trying to read the Morse signals from Californian, so Gibson on Californian also was looking through his binoculars, trying to read the flashing light that he could see on Titanic. And there's a sense that both of them knew it could have been code, but both of them, on inspecting it, decided it was just random flashes.
The lights on the other ship, however, remain the same. So then I looked through the binoculars and found that it was the masthead light flickering.
Gibson thinks the random flashing light he sees is coming from a flickering oil lamp on the mast of the small steamer. It isn't the strict dots and dashes of Morse, just random flashes. Boxall on the Titanic was equally confused. Eventually, the strange flickering mast light from the mystery ship ahead of Californian disappears. It is Titanic, sinking to the ocean floor. Tim began his investigation in Las Vegas, examining the piece of Titanic's hull dredged up from the bottom of the ocean. And it's here in Las Vegas that he finds the final piece of the puzzle.
I have spent years wondering why these two ships, which were trying to Morse each other all night, couldn't communicate. Right here, right now, is the answer. It's simply that these lights which we can see here, we know they're constant because there's no problems with the power supply in Vegas, but we can clearly see them flickering on and off with a staccato flash. And that reminds me of what Beasley was talking about when he said the stars really seem to be alive and to talk that night. And here we are, these lights seem to be alive and they almost seem to be talking. The tragic thing about this beautiful sight is it's exactly that phenomenon, known as scintillation, which scrambled Titanic's Morse lamp signals. And it meant that the nearby ship, instead of realizing it was Titanic and coming straight to her aid, never ever came to her aid.
Above the city, the layers of warm and cold air cause these lights to flicker, exactly as they did in the freezing North Atlantic. But on that night a century ago, it meant that a dying ship's desperate Morse signal with its plea for help was rendered meaningless. Ultimately, the solution to the mystery of Titanic may lie in nature. A simple trick of the light. Astonishing, beautiful, even magical. But in the end, lethal.
The sea was so very still, and the sky. So many stars. Never saw so many in my whole life.
The clear, starlit night made a noticeable difference in the degree of light just below the surface of the water.
They seem so near. And their light so much more intense than ever before. That fancy suggested they saw this beautiful ship in dire distress below, and all their energies awakened to flash messages across the black dome of the sky to each other, telling and warning of the calamity happening in the world beneath.